Coming up tonight is another special edition of 48 Hours NCIS. The 48 Hours team takes you to the streets with the real agents and real cases. Tonight's story is about honor. A missing sailor is declared a deserter and a thief, but two dedicated agents make it their mission to correct an injustice that left a shadow over the sailor's name for decades. Here's a sneak peek.
Arlington National Cemetery is a really sacred place. It serves the purpose of honoring our nation's veterans. Every headstone at Arlington has an incredible story. Andrew Munn's, his story is definitely one we shouldn't forget.
Andy Munns was my big brother. He loved his country and he was proud to serve in the Navy in 1968.
1968 was an incredibly tumultuous year for our country, to say the least. We were headlong into a really unpopular war in Vietnam. And there were massive protests on the street.
Andy Munns was a patriot at a time when it was not popular to be a patriot. And he joined the Navy for all the right reasons to serve his country.
Munns was a 24-year-old Navy officer serving aboard the USS Cacapon in the U.S. Naval Base Subic Bay in the Philippines.
Its job was to refuel the aircraft carriers and the destroyers. Andy was the dispersing officer, so he had the payroll, had to make sure that everybody got their money. It was not a huge crew, but they had to work really hard.
On January 17, 1968, Munns failed to show up to muster, which is the morning roll call. The crew searched for him, but he had disappeared, and so had $8,600 from the safe that he was in charge of. Munns was never heard from again.
This young man just wanted to serve his country. And within 3 weeks of reporting aboard that ship, he disappeared. And he was labeled a deserter and a thief.
He would never have taken that money. So something else happened.
The Navy investigated Munns' disappearance for 6 months, and that was it.
When somebody is a deserter, there is no honor as recognized by the Navy. They're a deserter. You don't get much lower than that.
When those white-gloved hands hand the family member that folded flag, you often see them pull it in close to their chest. It's that important of a symbol, and you're denied all of that. The Navy or the military shuts you out.
We knew that something bad had happened. Somebody killed my brother. My mother never got a flag. All service people get when they lose a son. She never had that closure.
Mary Lou, Munns' sister, made it her mission to find out what happened to her brother.
I knew I had to give it my best shot, but we had no way of getting the Navy to open a new investigation until one day I got a phone call that I almost didn't answer, but it was Pete Hughes from the Cold Case Squad from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Pete said, "Why should we open an investigation? Why do you think your brother was murdered?" And he let me talk.
She had explained to me certain things she had done on her own, and just hearing that just screamed she needed assistance.
While there's a statute of limitations on crimes, there's no statute of limitations self-imposed on agents to solving a crime. So where others may see an end, NCIS agents don't accept that, and will continue to drive forward.
There's no evidence, there's no crime scene, there's no witnesses. This case was the unsolvable. But one thing about Pete and I, we had a good track record for solving the unsolvable.
Munns' story was such a fascinating tale, it actually inspired one of the early episodes of NCIS, the TV show.
He was their dispersing officer. He was declared a deserter 30 days later, and he received a dishonorable discharge.
Dishonorable?
Something happened on that ship that night.
We knew there was a killer that lurked on that ship. In worst case, he's now somewhere in the United States.
And my colleague Rena Ninan sat down with actor Rocky Carroll. He plays the agency's director on the hit television series and narrates the 48 Hours broadcast.
I'm fascinated by the fact this case was closed by the Navy in 1968, and then 30 years later, why did they decide to reopen it?
Well, decades after the Officer Munns vanished, his sister spoke to the original naval investigator in the case, and he told her something that was very shocking, that this case actually haunted him his entire life, because he knew that something terrible had happened to her brother, that something bad had happened, but he couldn't prove it. So he wasn't a deserter, but there was no way that he could actually prove it.
And that's what the Navy classified him as. The Navy said this guy is a deserter.
Right.
The family didn't believe that.
Right, family didn't believe it, and even though there was no crime scene or no physical evidence, the retired agent and Munns' sister, they convinced NCIS to reopen the case because the agents felt an obligation to bring the truth to light.
Where exactly does NCIS begin with a case that's decades and decades old at this point?
Well, these agents approach cold cases much differently. They work from the outside in. So they look for crew members whose lives may seem to be spiraling out of control. In this particular case, they zeroed in on one sailor. He was considered to be a genius, but his life now was a bit of a mess. So these agents felt that he was hiding something, and they went to pay him a visit. They never imagined where this meeting would take them and the journey that it would lead them on.
It's remarkable. But why do you think it is 50 years later NCIS decides to look into this?
NCIS has a motto: to the living we owe respect, to the dead we owe the truth. It was incredibly important to NCIS and to the agents that Munns not be forgotten simply because of the passage of time. So this story was actually the inspiration for the NCIS series that we all know and love now.
I did not know this was the case it was based on.
This was the case it was based on.
I love that motto. To the living we owe, to the living, say that again,
to the living we owe respect, to the dead we owe the truth.
I love that.
Yeah.
Rocky, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And you can watch the full 48 Hours NCIS episode, A Sailor's Honor, tonight at 10 Eastern, 9 Central.